They thought they were denying a seat to an ordinary traveler, but before this flight touched the ground, they would learn the price of mistaking simplicity for weakness. Morning light poured through the towering glass walls of Terminal C at Reagan National Airport, turning polished floors into mirrors of motion and urgency. Rolling suitcases clicked like metronomes, boarding calls echoed overhead, and hurried travelers moved in streams toward gates lined with chrome and blue carpet. At Gate 18, passengers for Aurelia Air Flight 227 to Chicago gathered in two familiar lines, one for priority boarding, one for everyone else. In the shorter line stood Naomi Whitaker, wearing white sneakers, dark jeans, and a soft gray sweater with the sleeves pushed neatly to her wrists. Her hair was tied back in a plain knot. No jewelry except a slim silver watch. No designer logo in sight. To most eyes, she looked like a practical woman heading to visit family for the weekend. To those who knew the business pages, she was one of the youngest executives in American aviation. But Naomi had learned long ago that titles often spoke louder when introduced later. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Naomi glanced once at her boarding pass, then at the aircraft outside the window. She preferred early flights, fewer conversations, fewer assumptions. She stepped forward when the agent announced first-class boarding, but before she could scan her pass, a sharply dressed woman in a navy uniform intercepted her with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Brittany Cole, lead cabin attendant, wore authority like a polished accessory. Her posture was straight, her lipstick exact, her tone clipped by years of being obeyed quickly. "Ma'am," Brittany said, lifting one hand as though stopping traffic. "First-class boarding is this line." Naomi looked calmly at the line she was already standing in. "Yes," she replied, offering her pass. Brittany glanced at the paper, then at Naomi's sneakers, then at the gray sweater, then back to the pass as if it had personally offended her. "There seems to be a mistake." A few nearby travelers turned their heads. Naomi's expression did not change. "What kind of mistake?" she asked. Brittany lowered her voice just enough to sound polite, while keeping it loud enough for strangers to hear. "These seats are reserved for premium passengers." The man behind Naomi smirked. A woman in pearls adjusted her tote bag and looked away, pretending not to listen while listening to every word. Naomi held out the pass again. "It says 2A. Brittany did not take it. "And I'm saying you need to step aside while we sort this out." The gate area grew quieter in that peculiar public way when people sense humiliation and decide to stay for the ending. Naomi studied Brittany's name tag for one measured second. Brittany Cole. Then she nodded once. "Of course," Naomi said softly. No anger, no protest, no performance. That unsettled Brittany more than argument would have. She straightened her scarf and waved the next passenger forward. "Thank you for cooperating." Naomi moved aside and stood near the window, one hand resting on the handle of her carry-on. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, calm and unreadable. She had seen this scene in hotels, boardrooms, restaurants, and once at a charity gala where someone asked whose assistant she was. The details changed. The lesson never did. Moments later, Brittany returned with a reprinted boarding slip and an expression of thin victory. "We've reassigned you to 28C, she said. "Standard seating. You're welcome." Even the overhead announcements seemed to pause. Naomi accepted the paper without looking down. "I see," she said. Brittany smiled wider. She thought she had won something. 30 minutes from now, she would understand she had only documented her own mistake. Naomi walked down the jet bridge with the same steady pace she might have used entering a quiet library, while others rushed past her with the anxious energy of people guarding privileges they had not earned. The reprinted boarding slip in her hand read 28C in bold black letters, and though several passengers had witnessed what happened at the gate, no one said a word. Silence often traveled first class long before passengers did. Inside the aircraft, soft amber lights glowed along the ceiling panels, and the scent of brewed coffee mixed with chilled recycled air. First class sat at the front in wide leather seats with folded blankets and polished silver service trays waiting like promises. Naomi glanced once toward seat 2A, now occupied by the woman in pearls from the gate. The woman avoided eye contact and busied herself adjusting a scarf that did not need adjusting. Brittany Cole stood near the galley greeting passengers with that same trained smile, bright enough for cameras, cold enough for winter. When Naomi approached, Brittany blocked the aisle for half a second too long, then stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. "Coach is straight back, ma'am." Naomi nodded. "Thank you." Brittany's eyes narrowed slightly. She had expected embarrassment, perhaps anger, perhaps a scene she could later describe as difficult behavior. Instead, she received composure, and nothing unsettles arrogance more than calm. Row 28 was near the wing, where the engine hum was louder and legroom was more theory than reality. Naomi placed her carry-on overhead and sat beside an older man in a flannel shirt reading a newspaper on a tablet. He looked at her boarding slip, then at the front of the cabin, then back at her face. "Looks like somebody made a mess of things up there," he said quietly. Naomi buckled her seatbelt. "Sometimes people do." He gave a small nod, the kind exchanged between strangers who recognize dignity. "Name is Walter." "Naomi. Business trip?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Something like that." As boarding finished, Brittany moved through the aisle checking bags and correcting posture as if inspecting troops. When she reached row 28, she paused. "That bag should have gone under the seat." Naomi looked up. "There is room in the bin." "Policy changes," Brittany replied. "Today." Walter lowered his tablet slowly. Naomi reached up, removed the bag, and placed it beneath the seat without argument. Brittany moved on, victorious over a rule she had invented moments earlier. Walter leaned closer. "That was nonsense." Naomi adjusted her sweater cuffs. "Yes. You going to do anything about it?" he asked. Naomi turned toward the window where baggage carts crawled beneath the wing like toys. "Not yet." The aircraft pushed back from the gate. Safety demonstrations played on overhead screens while passengers half watched and half ignored. Naomi opened a slim black laptop once the captain announced they were second in line for departure. Spreadsheets filled the screen. Revenue charts, staffing metrics, customer complaint escalations. Walter glanced sideways, then looked again with more interest. "That does not look like vacation reading." "It is not," Naomi said. He chuckled under his breath. "I knew it." Wheels lifted, the city shrinking beneath clouds as sunlight flooded the cabin. 20 minutes into the flight, beverage service began. Brittany directed 2 junior attendants like a conductor directing strings. When the cart reached first class, glasses clinked, warm towels appeared, and names were used with theatrical precision. By the time they reached economy, the smiles had become efficient. At row 28, a young attendant offered drinks. Before Naomi could answer, Brittany stepped in from behind. "We are out of sparkling water back here." Naomi had watched 3 unopened bottles on the cart. "Regular water is fine," she said. Brittany folded her arms. "We are conserving supplies." Walter stared openly now. "Conserving water on a 45-minute hop to Chicago?" Brittany ignored him. Naomi accepted a paper cup filled halfway with ice and no water. The young attendant looked embarrassed. Brittany moved on. Walter shook his head. "Lady, whoever you are, you have patience I do not." Naomi looked at the untouched cup in her hand, then at the seatback map showing their progress across Ohio. "Patience," she said softly, "is often cheaper than interruption." Then she opened her laptop again, and on the top corner of the screen, visible for only a second before she angled it away, gleamed the gold crest of Aurelia Air Group. The cabin settled into that strange mid-flight rhythm where strangers pretended privacy while quietly studying one another. Overhead vents hissed. Ice rattled in plastic cups, and the engines droned with the steady confidence of expensive machinery doing what it was built to do. Naomi's fingers moved across the keyboard in measured strokes, reviewing columns of numbers as though she were seated in a private office instead of row 28. Walter tried not to stare, but curiosity had replaced annoyance. Aurelia Air Group, he said under his breath, glancing at the crest he had seen. That is the parent company, is it not? Naomi did not look up immediately. She finished a sentence on the screen, closed one spreadsheet, and then answered. Yes. Walter folded his hands over his stomach. You work for them? Naomi's eyes lifted with a calm that revealed nothing and everything at once. You could say that. Before he could ask more, turbulence gave the aircraft a brief shiver. Several passengers looked up. Seat belt signs chimed on. Brittany's voice came over the intercom, smooth and polished. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated while we pass through a little rough air. The cabin obeyed. Naomi resumed typing. 10 rows ahead, a child began to cry softly. His mother tried to comfort him while balancing juice boxes, headphones, and the weary patience of travel. A junior attendant started toward them, but Brittany stopped her with a glance and redirected her to first class where an empty glass had appeared. Naomi noticed. She noticed everything. The child's crying grew louder. The mother apologized to no one in particular, which is what tired people often do when the world has made them feel like inconveniences. Naomi unbuckled, ignoring Walter's warning look. Seat belt sign, he whispered. For a moment, she said. She stepped into the aisle, steady despite the light tremor underfoot, and knelt beside the row ahead. From her carry-on she removed a small packet of colored pencils and a blank legal pad. Would you like to help me draw an airplane? She asked the child. The tears stopped from surprise alone. Within seconds, the little boy was tracing crooked wings while Naomi added windows and clouds. The mother looked close to tears herself. Thank you, she mouthed. Naomi smiled gently and returned to her seat just as Brittany approached. Expression sharpened. Ma'am, passengers are expected to follow crew instructions. Naomi buckled in. The child needed help. That is not your responsibility. Apparently, Naomi replied softly. It was available. Walter turned his face toward the window to hide a grin. Brittany's jaw tightened. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. I do not know what point you are trying to make today, but this crew runs a professional cabin. Naomi met her gaze for the first time since boarding. Her eyes were steady, unreadable, almost kind. Then I hope professionalism arrives before landing. The words were quiet, but they landed heavier than shouting ever could. Brittany straightened at once, color rising in her cheeks. She walked away with the stiff precision of someone holding anger together by posture alone. Across the aisle, a college student removed one earbud. Did she just say that? Walter nodded proudly as if Naomi were family. She sure did. Naomi reopened her laptop. This time she connected to the aircraft wireless network, entered a secure password, and opened a message thread labeled Executive Operations. New emails waited, customer satisfaction reports, route performance summaries, pending leadership recommendations. She typed a short note. Request full service audit for Flight 227. Preserve gate camera footage, boarding logs, and onboard service records. Priority review upon arrival. She paused, then added one final line. Include crew leadership conduct. Send to my office and legal. She pressed send. Somewhere on the ground, notifications began to light up phones in offices with frosted glass and expensive chairs. Walter watched the screen without pretending otherwise. I knew you were not ordinary, he whispered. Naomi closed the laptop and finally allowed herself the smallest smile. Neither are most people, she said. Ahead, Brittany was speaking sharply to the junior attendants near the galley, unaware that every unkind gesture was no longer just behavior. It was evidence. Outside the window, clouds parted to reveal the wide patchwork of Illinois below. The captain announced they would begin descent in 15 minutes. The room did not know it yet, but gravity was not the only thing waiting on the ground. The aircraft began its descent through a bank of silver clouds, and with every 1,000 feet lost, the atmosphere inside the cabin seemed to tighten. Seat backs clicked upright. Window shades lifted. Phones were turned on too early and held hopefully toward the sky. In row 28, Naomi Whitaker sat with hands folded over her closed laptop, as composed as if she were waiting for a delayed meeting rather than the ending of a lesson others had written for themselves. Walter glanced at her, then toward the front galley where Brittany Cole was checking inventory with sharp gestures and sharper whispers. "You are very calm for someone who just sent a storm into the company offices," he murmured. Naomi kept her eyes on the clouds thinning below. "Storms are loud," she said. "Corrections are usually quiet." Walter chuckled softly. "I would not want to be on the receiving end of one." Across the aisle, the college student who had overheard earlier leaned in slightly. "Excuse me," he said, almost apologetic. "Do you actually work for the airline?" Naomi turned to him with the same measured courtesy she had shown everyone all morning. "I work for Standards," she replied. The student blinked once, then sat back in respectful silence. Up front, Brittany moved through the aisle collecting cups with theatrical efficiency. She stopped at row 28 and looked down at Naomi's untouched paper cup from earlier. "Still unhappy with service?" she asked. The tone was sweet enough to sound harmless, but the eyes behind it were not. Naomi handed her the cup. "No," she said, "just taking notes." Brittany gave a brief laugh. "I am sure management appreciates feedback." "They will," Naomi answered. The laugh died quickly. Brittany turned away without another word. A hush lingered in the row long after she left. Walter exhaled through his nose. "You do that on purpose, do you not?" "Do what?" "Make people hear themselves." Naomi's faint smile returned. "Sometimes that is enough." The captain announced final approach into Chicago O'Hare, apologizing for a light delay at the gate. Outside the window, runways stretched across the gray afternoon like ribbons of steel. Terminals gleamed in the distance, lined with aircraft tails bearing colors from around the world. Naomi looked at the time. 2:37. Right on schedule. She opened her phone and read a single incoming message from Executive Operations. "Team assembled at Gate B12. Security and regional leadership present. Awaiting your arrival." She locked the screen. 10 rows ahead, Brittany was now speaking with another attendant who looked increasingly nervous. The younger woman glanced back toward Naomi more than once. Guilt had a way of spreading faster than authority. As the wheels touched the runway, several passengers applauded lightly. The engines roared in reverse, then softened. The cabin shifted forward, then settled. Naomi looked out at the wet tarmac flashing past. "There it is," Walter said. "What?" "The sound of consequences landing." She laughed quietly for the first time that day. The plane taxied longer than usual before stopping at the gate. Seat belt signs remained on. People stood anyway, opening bins, reaching for bags, performing the familiar impatience of modern travel. Brittany's voice came over the speaker, strained now beneath professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until we are fully parked and the captain has turned off the seat belt sign." No one listened. Then the forward cabin door opened. But instead of the usual jet bridge agent or wheelchair attendant, 3 figures appeared in dark tailored coats beside the station manager in a gold airport badge. Behind them stood 2 uniformed security supervisors and a woman carrying a leather portfolio embossed with the Aurelia crest. Their eyes moved past first class, past the aisle directly toward row 28. Passengers nearest the front slowly sat back down. Bags were lowered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the overhead bins seemed suddenly too loud. Brittany, standing in the galley doorway, straightened instinctively and placed on her brightest smile. "Welcome aboard," she began. The station manager did not return it. "Where is Ms. Naomi Whitaker?" he asked. The name traveled through the cabin like electricity. Walter turned slowly toward Naomi, then back toward the front, then toward Naomi again as if confirming gravity still worked. Brittany's expression flickered. "I am sorry," she said carefully. There must be some confusion. Naomi rose from row 28, smoothed the sleeves of her gray sweater, and stepped into the aisle with quiet grace. No confusion, she said. I am right here. The cabin went silent in a way no announcement could ever command. For one suspended second, no one in the cabin moved. Passengers who had fought to stand first were now seated by surprise alone. The woman in pearls near seat 2A lowered her phone slowly. The college student across the aisle removed both earbuds. Walter folded his hands with the satisfied patience of a man who knew the best moments in life often arrived unannounced. At the front of the aircraft, Brittany Cole's smile remained on her face, but only because shock had not yet told it to leave. Ms. Whitaker, said the station manager, stepping forward into the aisle, welcome to Chicago. We are ready whenever you are. He spoke with the careful respect people reserve for those whose decisions affect careers, budgets, and futures. The woman with the leather portfolio opened it at once. Regional reports, ma'am. Human resources and legal are on standby. Naomi gave a small nod. Thank you, Dana. Then she turned toward Brittany, who was still gripping a service manifest like it might explain reality. You know her? Brittany asked the station manager, voice suddenly thin. He looked at her with open disbelief. This is Naomi Whitaker, Chief Executive Officer of Aurelia Air Group. The words moved through the cabin row by row like a pressure wave. A man near the exit whispered, CO? Someone else muttered, no way. Walter simply smiled and said nothing at all. Brittany blinked rapidly. There has to be some misunderstanding. Naomi's gaze stayed calm. There were several misunderstandings today. Brittany's shoulders stiffened. If this is about seating, I was following procedure. Naomi stepped forward one pace, no more. Then we will be very interested to review which procedure authorizes removing a confirmed passenger from seat 2A based on clothing. Brittany opened her mouth, then closed it. The younger attendants in the galley stared at the floor. Naomi continued, not louder, only clearer. We will also review why service standards changed by row number, why a parent with a distressed child was ignored, why false policy statements were issued, and why courtesy was treated as optional. Every sentence seemed to remove another inch of certainty from Brittany's posture. I did what I thought was best for the cabin, she said weakly. No, Naomi replied. You did what was easiest for your assumptions. The room went silent again. Even the impatient passengers in back understood they were witnessing something larger than an argument. They were watching values being weighed in public. The station manager cleared his throat. Ms. Cole, effective immediately, you are relieved of duty pending investigation. Please remain available for human resources. Brittany's face lost color. You cannot do this in front of passengers. Naomi answered before anyone else could. You had no concern about public embarrassment when it belonged to someone else. Brittany looked as if she wanted to protest, apologize, disappear, and argue all at once. None of those options seemed available anymore. Naomi turned to the two junior attendants. Your cooperation during the review will be noted individually. Integrity is still recognized here. Both women straightened with visible relief. One nearly teared up. Then Naomi addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the service many of you witnessed today. An airline is not judged by advertisements or seat maps. It is judged by how people are treated when no one important appears to be watching. Heads nodded across first class and economy alike. The woman in pearls looked down at her lap. Walter murmured, that one was for everybody. Naomi smiled faintly. Usually is. Dana handed her another document. Naomi signed once, then returned the pen. Suspend the entire active leadership chain for this flight crew pending review, she said. Reassign operations for tomorrow's departures and notify customer care to issue travel credits to all passengers on board. Several travelers exchanged startled looks that quickly turned into pleased disbelief. The college student whispered, this is unreal. Walter leaned toward him. No, son. This is accountability. Naomi retrieved her carry-on from the overhead bin herself, though 3 people rushed to help. She thanked them all and declined. As she stepped toward the open door, Brittany spoke one final time, voice barely audible. "I did not know who you were." Naomi paused at the threshold and looked back. Her answer was gentle enough to hurt more than anger. That was never the real problem. Then she walked into the jet bridge, and behind her an entire cabin remembered that respect should never require a title to be given. The jet bridge felt quieter than the aircraft had, as if even the walls understood that something important had just passed through. Naomi Whitaker walked with her carry-on in one hand and the same calm pace she had carried all morning. Behind her came Dana with the leather portfolio, the station manager, 2 regional executives, and a human resources director who had been summoned so quickly she still wore an airport visitor badge clipped crookedly to her blazer. Through the glass panels beside the bridge, rain traced thin silver lines across the runway. Chicago had dressed itself in gray for the occasion. At the end of the corridor, a conference room normally used for delay briefings had been cleared in minutes. Bottled water lined the table. Laptops glowed awake. Screens displayed flight numbers, staffing charts, and customer service dashboards. Naomi entered without ceremony and placed her bag beside a chair. "Begin with facts," she said. "Not explanations." People sat straighter. Dana opened the first file. "Gate camera footage confirms Ms. Cole removed your boarding pass, printed a downgrade, and reassigned seat 2A without supervisor approval. Revenue logs show the original first-class assignment remained valid." Naomi nodded once. "Next." The station manager swallowed hard. 3 complaints were filed from passengers before takeoff regarding unprofessional conduct at the gate. 2 were from customers in first class. Next. A regional operations vice president cleared his throat. Onboard service records indicate beverage inventory was fully stocked. Claims of shortage were false. Naomi's eyes moved briefly to the window. Next. The human resources director spoke carefully. "There are prior coaching notes regarding Brittany Cole. Repeated concerns include appearance-based assumptions, dismissive tone, and inconsistent treatment of passengers she considered low value." The room grew still. Some mistakes happen in moments. Others are rehearsed over years. Naomi rested her hands on the table. "And the crew culture?" No one answered immediately. Finally, one junior executive did what courage often requires and spoke before comfort returned. "There have been warnings," he said. "Strong numbers masked weak leadership. Complaints were closed too quickly because on-time metrics were excellent." Naomi looked directly at him. "Thank you for telling the truth while it still cost something." He lowered his eyes, both relieved and embarrassed. Naomi stood and walked slowly to the monitor displaying customer rankings. Aurelia Air had climbed in profit, slipped in loyalty, and plateaued in trust. Numbers never shouted, but they always testified. "This company does not sell seats," she said. "It sells confidence. Parents trust us with children. Families trust us with holidays. Professionals trust us with time. Travelers trust us with dignity in places where they have none of their usual control. The moment we sort people by shoes, sweaters, or accents, we become smaller than our airplanes." No one typed during those words. They simply listened. Dana handed her a prepared action memo. Naomi read it once, then made changes in blue ink. "Effective immediately," she said. "Brittany Cole is terminated for misconduct and violation of service ethics pending final legal review. Supervisory management at Gate 18 is suspended pending retraining and investigation. Flight 227 passengers receive full travel credits and written apologies. Launch a system-wide Respect First initiative by Monday morning. Mandatory training, anonymous reporting, and random service audits begin this week." Pens moved fast now. Laptops clicked like rain. "Also," Naomi added, "promote the junior attendant who attempted to help the child. Courage without rank is leadership." Dana smiled for the first time all afternoon. "Already noted, ma'am." A soft knock came at the conference room door. Walter stood there, hat in hand, escorted by security who suddenly looked embarrassed to have delayed him. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "I was told I could come by if I wanted to say goodbye." Naomi's face warmed instantly. "Walter, please come in." He stepped inside, looked around at the executives, then chuckled. "Well, I knew you were somebody. Did not know you were everybody's boss." Laughter broke the tension like sunlight through cloud cover. Walter reached into his jacket and handed Naomi the child's drawing from the plane, a crooked airplane with blue wings and too many windows. "The little boy forgot this. Thought you might want it." Naomi accepted it gently. "I do." Walter tipped his cap. "For what it is worth, you handled them better than I would have." Naomi glanced at the drawing, then back at the room full of people paid to lead. "Anger changes a moment," she said. "Standards change a company." Walter nodded as if filing that away for future use. When he left, the room stayed silent for several seconds. Then Naomi placed the child's drawing at the center of the table beside the profit charts. "There," she said softly. "Now we remember what matters." By 6 o'clock that evening, the story had already outrun the airport. It moved through terminals, break rooms, group chats, executive inboxes, and social media feeds with the speed only truth mixed with irony can travel. Passengers from Flight 227 posted versions of what they had seen. Some described the woman in the gray sweater calmly moved to the back of the plane. Others described the silence when the door opened and leadership stepped aboard. One post simply read, "She was treated like nobody until everybody stood up when she arrived." It was shared thousands of times before sunset. Inside Aurelia Air headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, monitors in the communications department tracked the rising wave of attention. Public sentiment climbed with every comment praising accountability and fell with every older complaint now resurfacing from customers who had their own stories of being dismissed, ignored, or judged. Naomi Whitaker sat at the head of the executive conference table with a cup of black coffee gone cold beside her. The child's drawing from the plane remained propped against a glass water pitcher. Around her sat senior leaders who suddenly looked less polished than usual. Crisis has a way of removing decorative confidence. "We have two choices," said the chief communications officer, tapping a tablet. "Issue a controlled statement tomorrow after legal review, or address it tonight while momentum favors us." Naomi leaned back slightly. Truth does not need 12 hours to become safer. The room went quiet. "Tonight," she said. "Full statement. No spin." Dana distributed a draft release. Naomi crossed out half of it. Where the language said unfortunate incident, she wrote misconduct. Where it said customer concern, she wrote public mistreatment. Where it praised swift response, she replaced it with overdue correction. "We are not heroes for cleaning what we should have prevented," she said. Pens stopped moving. Across town, Brittany Cole sat alone in her apartment still wearing part of her uniform, the scarf removed but draped over a chair like something retired from service. Her phone had not stopped vibrating for an hour. Friends asking what happened. Coworkers pretending sympathy while seeking details. A supervisor requesting a formal statement. She replayed the day in fragments that now looked different under honest light. The gray sweater, the calm eyes, the untouched cup, the words "I am right here." Pride had felt elegant in the morning. By nightfall it looked cheap. She opened social media and saw strangers debating her character from 15-second clips. She closed it again. Some consequences are public. The real ones happen in private rooms where excuses stop sounding convincing. Back at headquarters, Naomi approved complimentary credits not only for Flight 227, but for every passenger who had filed unresolved dignity-related complaints in the last 6 months. Finance objected softly. That could cost several $1,000,000. Naomi looked at the customer trust chart on the screen. Then it will be one of the cheapest repairs we have ever made. No one argued after that. Near 8 o'clock, Aurelia Air released a video statement. Naomi stood in a simple office with no dramatic background, no flag, no staged applause. "Today a passenger was treated unfairly by our team," she said directly into the camera. "That passenger was me, but this response is not about me. It is about every traveler who has ever felt smaller than the service they paid for. Respect cannot depend on appearance, class of seat, or who someone turns out to be." Effective immediately, we are changing how we train, how we report misconduct, and how we measure leadership. The video ended in under 90 seconds. It was viewed millions of times by midnight. Employees across the country watched from crew lounges and hotel rooms. Some felt fear. Many felt relief. At a small house in Ohio, the mother from the flight watched while her little boy colored another airplane at the kitchen table. "That is the lady who helped me," he said proudly. She smiled. "Yes," she answered. "And she helped a lot more people than that." Later, when the building had mostly emptied, Naomi remained alone in the conference room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The city lights blurred beyond the glass. She picked up the child's drawing and studied the crooked wings, the extra windows, the impossible proportions. Then she smiled to herself. Airlines spend fortunes designing brands. Yet the clearest picture of what one should be had been drawn in crayon at 30,000 feet. She placed the drawing back on the table and turned off the lights. Some companies change because profits demand it. The rare ones change because dignity finally walked through the door. The next morning, Aurelia air terminals across the country opened under a different kind of weather. Some cities had sunshine, some had fog. Some had sleet pushing sideways across runways, but inside the company there was a pressure system no forecast could chart. Managers who once measured success by departure times and upgrade sales were now reading a new memo with coffee gone cold in their hands. Respect first initiative. Mandatory, effective immediately. Every employee from gate agents to senior vice presidents was required to complete live training, not online shortcuts, not signature sheets, not polished promises. Real sessions. Real accountability. At Chicago O'Hare, the first-class line formed again at Gate B12. Frequent travelers stood with rolling bags and practiced impatience. Vacationers checked phones. A young gate agent named Elena Ramirez straightened her navy blazer and took a steady breath. She had been the junior attendant on Flight 227, the one who tried to help the crying child before being redirected. Overnight, she had received a promotion to customer experience supervisor. Some people wait years for doors to open. Others discover they were standing beside one all along. "Good morning, everyone," Elena said warmly. "We will begin boarding in just a few minutes. If anyone needs assistance, I am right here." The phrase carried farther than she intended. A few passengers smiled. One older man in flannel looked up from his newspaper and grinned broadly. "Walter, now that," he said, rolling toward the desk, "is a fine sentence." Elena laughed. "Mr. Walter, nice to see you again." "Nice to see justice has a schedule," he replied. At headquarters, Naomi Whitaker stood in a training room instead of the executive suite. No cameras. No press. Rows of gate agents, attendants, supervisors, and analysts filled the seats. Some expected a lecture. Others expected corporate theater. Naomi offered neither. She wore the same gray sweater from the flight. The room noticed immediately. "I kept this on purpose," she began. "Not because it matters, but because yesterday too many people believed it did." Heads lowered across the room. Naomi walked slowly between rows rather than speaking from the stage. You do not meet customers on their best days. You meet them when they are late, grieving, nervous, traveling with children, visiting hospitals, attending funerals, chasing opportunities, or returning from disappointments. If you cannot offer luxury, offer kindness. If you cannot offer upgrades, offer dignity. If you cannot solve everything, solve what your attitude touches. Pens moved quickly. No one looked bored. In the back row sat several leaders who had once considered empathy a soft metric. Today they wrote the fastest. Meanwhile, Brittany Cole entered a small office in the Human Resources Annex carrying a folder and the remains of pride. The room was plain, undecorated, impossible to impress. Across from her sat a counselor assigned to separation reviews. "How are you feeling this morning?" the counselor asked. Brittany almost answered defensively, then stopped. Yesterday had exhausted performance. "Ashamed," she said quietly. It was the first honest word she had spoken in 24 hours. "That can be a beginning," the counselor replied. Outside the training room, A maintenance worker adjusted a ceiling vent and paused to listen through the open door. He had been ignored by executives for years. Naomi's voice carried into the hallway. Every badge in this company matters. Pilots do not fly without mechanics. Gates do not open without agents. Cabins do not function without cleaners. Strategy means nothing if respect fails at the first hello. The worker smiled to himself and returned to work a little taller. By noon, videos from the training leaked online. Not scandal clips this time, but employees holding doors, kneeling to speak kindly to children, helping elderly travelers with bags, apologizing sincerely for delays instead of hiding behind scripts. Cynics called it public relations. They were partly right, but habits, even good ones, often begin because someone is finally watching. Late that afternoon, Naomi crossed the terminal anonymously with a coffee in hand. No escort, no announcement. She stopped near a gate where a man in paint-stained jeans approached the podium looking embarrassed. "I think I am in the wrong line," he said. "I do not usually fly much." Elena smiled exactly as if he had arrived in a tailored suit. "Sir, you are in the right place. Let me help you." Naomi stood still for a moment, then continued walking. Some victories do not need applause. They only need repetition. And in airports across America that day, strangers were treated better by people who had finally learned that status is temporary, but character boards every flight. 3 months later, travelers noticed something had changed long before they knew why. Lines still formed, weather still delayed flights, bags still rolled across polished floors, and boarding groups still crowded too close to the gate. Airports remained airports, but the tone had shifted. Agents made eye contact. Apologies sounded human. Parents with strollers were helped before they had to ask. Elderly passengers were greeted by name. Travelers dressed in work boots received the same warmth as travelers in tailored coats. Nothing about the terminals looked revolutionary, yet thousands of small moments had quietly become one. Aurelia Air rose to the top of national customer rankings that quarter, but Naomi Whitaker barely mentioned it in meetings. Charts were celebrated by people who needed trophies. She preferred evidence you could feel. On a bright Monday morning at Reagan National Airport, Naomi arrived again with one carry-on, white sneakers, dark jeans, and the same gray sweater folded over her arm. She had another first-class ticket, though no one around her knew it. She joined the standard line instead of priority boarding and watched. A young gate agent greeted each passenger with the same steady warmth. A businessman impatiently demanded to board early. He was politely redirected. A woman who spoke hesitant English was guided through the process with patience. A construction worker worried his bag was too large and was helped without embarrassment. Naomi said nothing. She simply observed the culture the way gardeners inspect soil. "Ma'am," the gate agent said when Naomi reached the desk, smiling naturally rather than performatively. "You are in Group 1, but thank you for waiting. We can board you now." Naomi handed over her pass. "You handled everyone kindly," she said. The young man shrugged modestly. "Travel is stressful enough already." Naomi's eyes warmed. "That is excellent policy." He laughed softly. "I just work here." "So do I," she replied, taking her boarding pass and walking on before recognition could interrupt sincerity. On board, she took seat 2A without ceremony. A flight attendant named Marcus welcomed every passenger with equal courtesy, adjusting bins, offering water, helping an elderly veteran store a cane, kneeling to speak gently with a nervous child. Service moved with efficiency, but also grace. Midway through boarding, Walter appeared in the aisle wearing the same flannel shirt and carrying a paperback novel. He stopped dead when he saw Naomi. "Well now," he said loudly enough for 3 rows to hear. "Looks like they found your seat this time." Laughter rolled softly through the cabin. Naomi stood to hug him briefly. "Walter, where are you headed?" "Denver. My granddaughter made the honor roll and intends to celebrate at my expense." She motioned to the empty seat beside her. "Trade with whoever is there." "My guest." Walter blinked. "You sure?" "Absolutely." Minutes later he settled beside her, grinning like a man who trusted surprises more than schedules. During the flight, he looked around the cabin and nodded with approval. "Feels different," he said. Naomi glanced as Marcus patiently remade a spilled drink tray for a passenger who apologized too much. "It is," she answered. "People usually become what leadership tolerates." Walter considered that for a while. "And what does leadership become?" Naomi looked out the window where clouds stretched like fields of light. "Whatever it is willing to model." After landing in Denver, passengers waited to deplane when a small boy from 2 rows back approached Naomi, holding a crayon drawing of an airplane. "My mom said you run this company," he whispered. "Is that true?" Naomi smiled. "Sometimes." He handed her the picture. "Then tell them I like how nice everybody is now." The room went quiet in the sweetest possible way. Naomi accepted the drawing as if it were a formal award. "I will tell them," she said. In the jet bridge, Marcus caught up to her. "Ma'am, I only just learned who you were after landing. If I had known earlier, I would have done more." Naomi shook her head gently. "You did not